We come now to Daniel chapter 2, and I am still reeling over Daniel chapter 1. That's very exciting to see what God can do with faithfulness as God shows himself real. I obviously, even today with looking at Daniel chapter 2, my mind can't help but go back to Genesis and how God blessed the faithfulness of Joseph. Certainly times of adversity, very real adversity, and times of advancement. And each one comes with problems that need to be overcome, but God is faithful in each and honors the man who is faithful. Let's look to the Lord in prayer as we look at Daniel chapter 2 today. Lord, we love you. We thank you for your goodness, Lord. These are your words, and I am overjoyed that I get to look at them today. I pray, Lord, you just bless this time as we look at them, give us wisdom. Lord, I pray that you'd help me to say the things that would be glorifying to you and that would be a help to the students, Lord. I do ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. So we come now to part number 2, a king's fame. A king's fame, verses 1 through 49, this whole chapter. So, capital A, verses 1 through 16, we will see the king and the Babylonian professionals. The king and the Babylonian professionals. It says, and in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So, we see that it was the second year of his reign. So the question comes up, was Daniel only training for parts of 3 years? Was he promoted before the others because of his interpretations? We know that he was going to be training for 3 years, and it seems like he should be on the scene now after chapter 1, but we're only in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So what's going on here? Most likely, this is referring to the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign while being the sole monarch. I do have a chronology here that maybe we can discuss on a Schoology discussion or something. But there is a way to kind of lay out the chronology to show this. But we do have the question, why is Daniel seemingly unknown? Why is he not called for when the king has this problem? When it says in chapter 1 that Daniel was found to be 10 times better than the wise men. Why wouldn't he have been thought about when the king now desperately desires an answer to his dream in this chapter? And we also can't help but suspect Nebuchadnezzar was brilliant in his own right. It's been brought up. I read this and I kind of suspect, I wonder if this was kind of his way of, the dream was God's timing. But I bet you he had a way possibly of using this to his advantage. This is the chance I'm going to get to possibly clean out some of the ranks, some of the imposters in my wise men. Use this as an opportunity to clean them out a little bit. And possibly even, maybe there were men that he wanted to clean out that still had loyalties to his father or lay somewhere else, and this might have been his excuse. I don't know if he needed one. One thing is interesting later on is the wise men here will ask for more time, and the king will say, oh, no, you're just trying to come up with a plan. And then Daniel, he'll ask for time, and the king says, okay. So we can't exactly know why the king granted more time to Daniel. I have some ideas, and then why the wise men weren't. But we come now to this time. So the date is recorded. This is the second year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. This is a momentous chapter. Here in this chapter will be depicted the history of the Gentile world through 4 successive empires, and including the prophecy of the ultimate domination of Christ's millennial kingdom. So, the king and his Babylonian professionals. So let's look at verses 1 through 3, and we see, first of all, underneath this, the king's dilemma. The king's dilemma, verses 1 through 3. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. So we have his dilemma, first of all. Underneath this, we'll see his dream, verse 1. We see dreams. Maybe possibly plural, because I don't know if maybe there were several aspects of the same dream, or did he have the same dream over and over again? We do see it's plural here. It does seem like there is one interpretation for the different aspects of this picture later on. But it seemed like he was held captive by his own dreams, and then sleep break from him. By the way, we see that being the most powerful man in the world does not guarantee peace of mind. Going through the book of Proverbs, you see passages like, better is a dry morsel with quietness therewith than the idea of all sorts of things to cover your table, but strife and no peace of mind. So wealth and power don't guarantee peace of mind. Did he, like Ebenezer Scrooge, wonder if this was just a bit of undigested beef? One way or the other, he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Was it still the middle of the night? I imagine he's important enough that it doesn't matter. 24 hours a day, his wise men need to be on call. He was troubled, agitated, stricken. This is a hithpael, reflexive verb pattern, indicating a smiting action against oneself. So he was very, very troubled by this dream. So one, his dream. Two, his decision. He called to him the magicians. The root word here means engraver. They must have been the religious scribes who engraved the movements of the astral bodies through the zodiac in clay tablets and interpreted these movements. So there's an idea of who they might have been. Astrologers, the root here has the idea of conjuring. So they probably gave incantations that would have been based upon astrology. And it's thought that these probably also attempted to communicate with the dead, like mediums or channelers of today. There were also sorcerers. These would have been similar to the wizards that Pharaoh had in his court. We think back to Exodus 7:11. And we are reminded that God wanted these types of people put to death. Exodus 22:18, Deuteronomy 18:10, Jeremiah 27:9. Acts chapter 8 tells us about Simon Magus, the sorcerer who was in the bond of iniquity. So these weren't good men, and these were the men that Nebuchadnezzar had surrounded himself with. And he also called to him the Chaldeans. This was a special class of Babylonians, cross-reference Jeremiah 22:25 and Ezekiel 23:23. They were from southern Babylon. And they were especially associated with Bel-Merodach, in whose temple the temple treasures from Jerusalem had been placed. So he called these to come and show him his dream. He didn't have visions. The Bible says that he had dreams. Daniel had visions. Daniel was not taking part in the pagan practices of these other wise men. And he makes it clear later on that it is God who helps him and it's God who he seeks after. So we see the dream and the decision, but we also see his doubts. His doubts, verse 3. It really bothered him that he couldn't make sense of all of this. So the king's dilemma and then the king's demand, verses 4 through 11. I think I'll go ahead and read, break this up a little bit. So I'll give you this and we'll break up the reading. Now, beginning with the words, O king. So there in verse 4, then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king. So the language of the Old Testament actually changes here. The Bible is written mainly in Hebrew, the Old Testament in Greek, the New Testament, and there is some Aramaic as well. Syriac or Aramaic. So this portion here, starting with chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, the Chaldeans spake to the king in Syriac, this is the language of Daniel actually changes for many verses here into Aramaic or Syriac. So Aramaic and Hebrew have a very similar form and syntax, but they have mostly a different vocabulary. They share some of the same words, as we'll see one later on today, but they had a different vocabulary. Some Jews we see in Isaiah 36:11 were speaking Aramaic in Isaiah's day. So, O king, live forever. So it's a really good idea when the king is upset to be super nice to him. O king, live forever. We love you, man. We just love you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Now he's very, very troubled. And when he's troubled, you better act like it bothers you that he's troubled. Or if you don't care that he's bothered, like my kids, when they're bothered, I'll say, settle down. But when dad's bothered, they better act like something's wrong. Hey! So the king's bothered, they better act like they're ready to jump on this. And again, we were reminded of 2 Kings 25:7 with and Jeremiah 29:22. Even with Zedekiah, sons put to death in front of him, eyes roasted out, and even it says, whom the king roasted in the fire in these passages. So the king's demand. We see first of all the first demand. So let me read verses 4 through 6. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. So they're pretty confident. As long as they can hear the dream, we will show. So there wasn't any doubt. And by the way, that's why he kept them around. They probably weren't allowed to say. And we might be able to, probably the last guy that said, I might be able to help you was put to death. So they probably quit saying, we might be able to help you. I think that there needed to be some confidence in this group. We will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. Okay. Wow. These men are at the end of themselves. They can't believe their ears. There's no way they can tell him what he dreamed and what the meaning of it was. Probably it's running through their minds, he doesn't remember. We can probably make something up. But then when he thinks, that's not what I dreamed, then he'll probably not just kill us, but torture us as long as possible before we die. So we see under the first demand a rational request. Tell us what you dreamed. And between us, we will come up with some sort of interpretation that will be sure to wow you. That's my paraphrase. And then we see a reasonable response. What the king professed, first of all, underneath this, what the king professed, the thing is gone. This is an Aramaic pial verb, the idea of to go away. The thing is gone from me. And again, he says it's gone. It was probably gone, but was it really? Was the king just pretending that it was gone so that he could tell whether these supernatural men really were supernatural? Was this a test? Nebuchadnezzar is striking as an intelligently far-sighted man. He educated his Judean captives rather than slaughtering them or sending them away to whatever the Babylonian version of Siberia would have been. Now he expects his psychics to really have the power they claim to have, not just some parlor tricks. He expected that he would be able to tell if they were making things up. So again, if he says, I don't remember what I dreamed, you tell me. And if you don't, I'll kill you. I will cut you in pieces and make your houses a dunghill. So somehow they were looking at him and realizing that he was going to be able to tell if they were making something up. I heard an illustration of KGB agents coming into a room where some Christians were gathered, and they held up their guns and said, this meeting is illegal. Anybody who wants to reject Christ and get out of here right now can do so, and we won't press charges. And so several of the people scurried off. And then they said, now the rest of you, you're willing to suffer the consequences of being followers of Christ? And they all nodded their head. And these two KGB agents said, good, then we're going to stay and worship Christ with you. The KGB agents told them that they had gotten saved, but they couldn't risk anybody that really wasn't committed to Christ knowing that they belonged to Christ. And so they wanted to come in with their guns and make sure the people that weren't real took off. And they were only going to worship with the people that were truly committed to Christ. With fright, they came in and cleaned out the meeting. And possibly Nebuchadnezzar, with this threatening, is coming up with a way to clear out his wise men in some way, to leave only the ones that were truly wise. So what the king professed, the thing is gone. And then what the king promised, we already saw that. He says, tell me what I dreamed and what it meant, or there will be execution. You will be cut in pieces, dismembered. Ouch! I don't like the sound of that. We know that Agag was cut in pieces by Samuel, 1 Samuel 15:33. Also Ammonites by David, probably maybe similar to being drawn and quartered. Also their houses would be made a dunghill, destroyed, never to be occupied again, but to be put to contemptible uses. 2 Kings 10:27 talks about the house of Baal that was pulled down and something similar done to it. So, had they failed him before? Did he suspect them of duping him in the past? Had there been previous threats? And was this the final straw? So he promised execution or exaltation. You will receive gifts and rewards and great honor. So we see the first demand, then we see the second demand in verses 7 through 11. I'll read those. They answered again and said, now I think they're getting a little more bold here because they know they better get a little more bold possibly. They have nothing to lose. They're going to die. They can't do it. So we might as well get a little bold. In fact, the way they talk to the king here, you almost want to say, you better be careful, pal, you're going to die. And they probably say, yeah, that's why we better be a little more bold here because we're going to die. We better be a little bold and be a little more demanding and say, King, I'm scared to death to tell you that this is unreasonable, but it's unreasonable. So here in verses 7 through 11, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. So again, for a second time, they're like, please tell us the dream. You gotta tell us the dream. Come on, you gotta tell us the dream. And maybe this is what sets Daniel apart later on. He never says, you just gotta. He just says, well, God knows. Can I have some time to ask him? This is probably the very thing that sets them apart. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I know that ye can show, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, or ruler that asked such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. How dare they? But I think they kind of have nothing to lose here. King, nobody else asks this. It can't be done. There's no man that can do this. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth. And there is none other that can show it before the king, except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. And so it's interesting, they say, God who doesn't dwell with us with flesh. Again, it's interesting that they put it that way, because God, many years later, would become flesh, not just dwell with flesh, but become flesh. But here they're saying that the gods don't dwell among the flesh, and that they know, but we have no access to them. But aren't you supernatural men that have access to your false gods? It's like, yeah, no, a lot of that's just make-believe. Some of it's this, some of it's that. No, we don't have access to our gods. The gods you follow, you can't access? Right. Isn't it good to be a Christian? Because we have access. We don't have to tell people, yeah, there's no one that can help you with God, except for God, and then He doesn't dwell among us. There's nothing that can be done. There's no help for you. There's no help that we can provide, and therefore we're in trouble because we can't give you the help. You're going to kill us because we can't help you with this. Today, it's good to be a Christian and to know that Jesus died to give me access, He as my mediator, to God up in heaven. So we see the further demand, the request renewed. They asked him once again to tell them the dream. Maybe they hoped he would start to be a little bit more reasonable this time. And possibly there were older men among them and saying, we just have to make it clear that we can't do it without knowing the dream. We have to be very insistent. It's our only hope. They obviously thought he remembered at least some of it. Do you remember anything? Archaeologists have actually discovered occultist literature with guidelines for standard interpretation of dream symbols. So there are actually guidelines for interpreting dreams, but you probably had to have the dream to use those guidelines. And of course they were bunk anyway. The Bible's the truth. So the request renewed and then the request refused in verses 8 and 9. We see first of all what he saw, what the king saw, verse 8. He knew that they were vying for time. They were hoping to gain or buy time till the time be changed. So maybe something would happen in the kingdom and the king's mind would go on to something else, and maybe he would need their advice for something, and they thought the only hope we have is if we just get some time for the king's mind to be occupied with something else. Then in verse 9 we see what the king suspected. He said, well, I know that you've prepared lying and corrupt words for me. There's a story about Chaka, the powerful Zulu. he secretly smeared blood on his hut, and then he feigned rage and demanded of the witch doctors, whose power was rivaling his, to tell who had done the evil deed. They went through all the show of their trade and presented him with the culprits. Zulu handed them over to the people they accused for execution. So here he is, this powerful witch doctor, and there were other witch doctors he wanted to get rid of. And so he smears blood on his hut himself, and then he in a rage, he says to the witch doctors, "Do your spells and tell me who did this." And they went through all their spells and pretended that some other people had done it because they didn't know. And then Zulu, he said, "These people are innocent. You falsely accused them because you're a fake." And so he turned those witch doctors over to the innocent people to be killed. So the unsaved mind can be very clever. And who knows what Nebuchadnezzar is hoping to do with all of this. But the unsaved mind isn't remotely as clever as God, who's using this whole thing to reveal how God is going to lay out much of world history, even up to the point where God will come back and we have the millennial kingdom right here. From Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the millennial kingdom, a laying out of world events right here in chapter 2. But Nebuchadnezzar is trying to use this to his benefit. The wise men are vying, and Daniel doesn't have to think of trickery. He just has to be simply following God and live for him and live for the honor of God, and he comes out on top. So, it seems like Nebuchadnezzar might be taking this opportunity to do some spring cleaning. And then thirdly, we see the request rephrased. So basically, we see them, they say this is a human impossibility. And then they say it's a heavenly improbability. So first with a human impossibility, they're saying, we're the best of the best. You are the main leader, and we are your advisors. We're the best of the best. And if we can't do it, and BTW, we can't, it can't be done. You ask a rare, the word literally means a heavy. You ask a heavy thing. And no other king can make such terrible demands. It's not reasonable anywhere. And then they say it's a heavenly improbability. Only God can tell the future. They were admitting that they didn't have access to the gods they claimed to follow. And again, isn't it wonderful to be a Christian? The Lord God became flesh and dwelt among us. We read that in 1 Timothy 3:16. And then Jesus is our mediator, 1 Timothy 2:5. So next we see the king's decree in verses 12 through 16. For this cause, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree so hasty from the king?" Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. He says, if you'll give me time, I will show this unto you. And not just the interpretation, but including the dream itself. And what's amazing is the king allows it. So we see the king's decree, verses 12 through 16. First of all, we see the death warrant signed, verses 12 and 13. No more excuses, verse 12, and then no man exempted, verse 13. No more excuses, verse 12. He was angry and very furious. We see his temper coming into play. And we know his temper. We've already read about his temper. We're going to see his temper again later on when Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah say, we're not going to bow. Oh, the temper of Nebuchadnezzar. And they say, we're not careful. We're not afraid of your temper. We are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Oh, but there were, I tell you, in the fear of the Lord, there is strong confidence. And how are you going to stand in the face of a Nebuchadnezzar and have any kind of confidence? If you realize there's somebody far bigger and far scarier than Nebuchadnezzar. And if you're close to the Lord, in the fear of the Lord is strong confidence. These men didn't have the fear of the Lord and didn't have this confidence. And so when Nebuchadnezzar was in this rage, there was nowhere to hide. And doom was quickly pursuing them and would catch them. No man exempted, verse 13. He was intolerant of the impotence of the wise men of Babylon who were gathered and who were to be slain. The word here is an Aramaic hithpael, the idea of intense action. So it wasn't going to be and we'll quietly gather all of them. And then in the course of time, we shall put them to death. Oh no, the king was erupting. And the men that were his guards and Arioch, the people whose job it was to carry out his will, their job was to erupt when he erupted. If they were moving slowly and the king had erupted, they would have died too. The king basically, when I erupt, you erupt. And I've erupted. Wise men gathered, slain. The word has the idea of intense action. And so there was a gigantic stir, and soldiers are going everywhere, gathering wise men from all over. Most of them probably had been gathered, but of course this might have been just the middle of the night. How many might have been traveling on some sort of errand of some sort? So the death warrant signed, but then we see the death warrant stayed in verses 14 through 16. We see what Daniel discovered, verses 14 and 15. Apparently, Daniel and his friends were not present at the meeting. Were they gathering wise men to be killed, or were they already executing? Had some died already? Was the devil stirring up the temper of Nebuchadnezzar in order to get rid of Daniel? Who knows? Some of these questions we won't be able to answer until heaven. But Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom. Probably discretion, suitability, appropriateness are the watchwords here. So he answered Arioch of the king's guard. The word literally means to execute. They were the king's executioners. He was the captain, literally chief or mighty one. So he answered Arioch, the captain of the guard, why is this decree so hasty from the king? And why did Arioch even talk to him? Why didn't Arioch just grab Daniel and carry out his orders? Why are they having a conversation? Well, because, Joseph was brought into favor with the keeper of the prison, brought into favor with Potiphar. Daniel was brought into favor with the chief of the eunuchs. I'm telling you, when you live for what man thinks will fail you. And Arioch could have not even had this conversation with Daniel. Just grabbed him and put him there to be slain or slain him. But Daniel says, stop. How can Daniel do this? He has a big God. Daniel just says, hold on, time out. Stop for a minute. Why is the king's decree so hasty? And to me, it's miraculous that they're even having a conversation here. Maybe Arioch, I think there's a lot of things in play. Bottom line, God wanted Daniel to have the chance to tell the king what the dream meant. But who knows what all is involved here? Did Arioch look at Daniel and know that probably Daniel had a much bigger God than these astrologers and soothsayers and all these men? And maybe Daniel really would have an answer. I can't imagine Arioch going to Nebuchadnezzar later on and saying, we did it. We took care of everybody. By the way, one guy, Daniel, he claimed that he could help you, but I got rid of him anyway because you said very clearly just to kill all the wise men. That probably wouldn't have been a good thing to say to Nebuchadnezzar either. What? Somebody had an answer for me? But anyway, again, lots of questions. But it's exciting to see how special Daniel is. And once again, he didn't live for the opinions of men. Because again, when you do that, those opinions are fickle. And you find that men's opinions, you get stoned. Like the men that stoned Paul. But when you live for the opinions of God, at the right time, man will have to show you respect. God orchestrated this whole thing, just like in the life of Joseph. Yes, the opinions of man, God allowed them to let him down when Potiphar listened to his wife and he was cast into jail. But again, that was God allowing things to happen as he wanted them to. The safest thing to do is to live for the opinion of Almighty God. So what Daniel discovered, and then what Daniel did in verse 16. We see his courage, first of all. He approaches the king, and again, the king is furious. Probably the safest place, humanly speaking, is far away from the king. But in the fear of the Lord, there is strong confidence. Daniel goes right to the king, and he says, I'll give you an answer. I just need some time. And his tone must have possessed a ring of certainty and assurance that was missing from the others. And again, we mentioned that he wasn't begging over and over again to hear the dream. I read this the other day in Proverbs, chapter 17. And I thought of Daniel here and Joseph. Proverbs 17:7, excellent speech becometh not a fool, much less do lying lips a prince. We know that Daniel was princely, and he was no fool. And he gave excellent speech and honesty. There was an integrity. Why did Pharaoh instantly exalt Joseph to second in command? Second most powerful man in the world. Right out of prison. Something about the way he spoke and what he said rang with excellent truth and wisdom. A princely excellence. A truthful, princely excellence. And Pharaoh said, I want you to have all the power you need. And again, second in command of the world. Daniel, to here and there in the book of Daniel, it seems like he's near second most powerful man in the world over the other presidents later on with the next kingdom. But even here, exalted, and Belshazzar later on exalts him. But the thing is, he comes in with this speech and he says, I'll give you an answer. I need some time. And the others wanted time, and he goes, get on, you have lying words for me. But he says, okay, you have the time you need. Why? Again, get close to the Lord. Act like a child of the King. Love him. Get close to him. Fear him. Enjoy the strong confidence that is a result. Your speech, if you allow him to, God can give you truthful, excellent, princely speech that commands attention. Not because we're saying what we want to say. Joseph told the king what God told Joseph to tell the king. Daniel is about to tell the king what God told Daniel to tell the king. And Daniel already had wisdom from God that he had demonstrated before this king as a result of being sold out to God in chapter 1. Again, this is astounding to me. And it's a wonderful encouragement. This man, Daniel, dare to be a Daniel. So we see his courage. And then we see his commitment. He said, I will tell you the interpretation. When we get together next time, we will conclude chapter 2 from verses 17 through 49.